I see that people are coming in. So let's slowly start, and the other people will come in during the presentation. That's not a problem. So once again, a warm welcome to this webinar about OTCAD, the Operation Technology Cyber Attack Database. Quite an interesting topic, I think. It's also related to Sun Tzu. He already wrote in the book The Art of War, like, if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the results of 100 battles. And actually, the database that we created based on the incident is really about this. We want to understand the attackers, the techniques that they are using, and what the impact could be on your organization. So welcome there. A little bit about Secura. Most people already know us. We are a company that really want to provide insight into your digital security, and we do that with an holistic approach. So both with people, process, and technology. So on one hand, we do technical penetration testing and these kind of things. On the other hand, we look at security maturity and all kind of ways you can grow the maturity in your company. We do that on IT systems, OT systems, IoT systems, and we do that for multiple market groups. The focus today is from the industrial market group. My name is Sjoerd Perelkamp. I'm heading the industrial market group. And I brought today my colleague Stas, and he can introduce himself. I would say yes. Enjoy your webinar. Make sure that all questions you have, you enter them in the question box in the GoToWebinar panel there, and we'll come back to them either during the presentation or at the end. So enjoy your session, and I leave it to Stas.
Thank you, Sjoerd. My name is Stas Kopinski. I'm a part-time OT security consultant at Secura and a part-time PhD student at the Technical University of Eindhoven. And I'm going to present OTCAD to you. So first, what's on the agenda today? I'll start with a short introduction. What is OTCAD? What is its vision? Then I will tell you something about Attack for ICS, an important framework for OTCAD, the mapping methodology of OTCAD, and the how we include cyber attacks and when not to include cyber attacks in OTCAD. Some of the problems we ran into while making OTCAD. Some statistics from OTCAD, some trends that can be observed within OTCAD, and lastly, conclusion. So first, what is OTCAD? OTCAD is a database of 133 cyber attacks between 1988 and 2020. So there's a little asterisk next to the 133 cyber attacks, which I will come to in a moment. These cyber attacks are mapped in three mapping categories. First, they're attack factors, in which the attacks are mapped to the different techniques of attack for ICS, the different industry domains that these cyber attacks took place in, and adversary classifications such as target attacks, disgruntled employees, and target attacks. OTCAD can be found on Secura's GitHub. It's completely public to everybody, and it is also accompanied by a white paper which goes into a little more detail of the presentation that I'm giving right now. So OTCAD's vision is it should be of high level of credibility. So everybody should be able to either confirm or refute the information that's in OTCAD. So the information should be publicly accessible to do this. So be able to say like, okay, yeah, this is confirmed because it's in this news article. It should also be factual information. So no speculative mappings such as, okay, this was a ransomware attack and we think that it happens this and this way, because yeah, this is not a fact, this is just speculation. And an important vision of OTCAD is that it could grow through collaboration. This is also why it's on GitHub. Everybody can add information to OTCAD. So what is MITRE's Attack for ICS framework? It's an important part of OTCAD because we map the cyber attacks to them, and the Attack for ICS is a knowledge base of adversary behavior, which consists of tactics, so goals for adversaries, and techniques, methods to achieve these goals. We use Attack for ICS because it's common terminology. So if you're talking with someone about techniques and tactics within Attack for ICS, and this person also knows Attack for ICS, you're certain that you're talking about the same thing, which is something that's not always the case in cybersecurity. It's widely used. Many tools are already available to work with attack for ICS and the data in attack for ICS. And yeah, this makes it very easy to work with. So for OTCAD, we use the version 8 of the attack for ICS matrix, which looks like this. So here in the top, you can see the tactics, aka the goals. And here you can see different methods to achieve these goals. So for example, to get initial access into a victim's network, a possibility is to use a spear phishing attachment. So what we do for these attacks is we map them to these different techniques. So you can see like, okay, this attack, the adversaries came in via supply chain compromise, and they, for example, were able to move within the network using valid accounts or default credentials, which gave an impact, for example, theft of operational information. So the methodology, the mapping methodology of OTCAD is two things. First is the inclusion criteria. So what we really want is attacks on operational technology. So there are a lot of attacks that are claimed to be attacks on operational technology, but they only, for example, were able to attack the enterprise network of an operational or for example, a car manufacturer. These attacks are still just IT attacks in our opinion and are just not included in OTCAD. The attacks must be somewhat deliberate. So a cyber incident such as a hardware failure or something are not included also in OTCAD. And in line with OTCAD's vision, information sources must be presented as facts, and the information must be publicly available. So the mapping method, how do we map an attack to attack for ICS within OTCAD? So what we do is we only map the adversary intended techniques, which means that secondary consequences are not added as well, because it will dilate the database. So for example, a spear phishing attachment or a replication through USB mostly causes an engineering workstation compromise. But if the engineering workstation compromise was not the initial intended technique of an adversary to get access into a network, it will not be mapped to the engineering workstation compromise technique, just only the spear phishing attachment, or for example, the replication through USB. This will also, as a little drawback, that OTCAD is always subjective to some extent, because you can argue, okay, yeah, I think engineering workstation compromise was really one of the techniques, one of the intended techniques used by an adversary. And this is why it's so important for all information to be publicly available, so it can be verified. And if you do not agree with this this mapping, you can start a discussion, because you know, based on this information, it is possible to according to this information, you can say, okay, this is either our engineering workstation compromise or it is not. So it is able to start a discussion instead of having to accept that someone has mapped this to engineering workstation compromise, but it does not provide the sources why it did do this mapping. Furthermore, to each tactic, the unknown and not applicable options are added. This allows us to make a distinction between a tactic that's not used within a cyber attack. For example, lateral movement is not always needed if in a cyber attack just consists of stealing a laptop and extracting the data from that laptop. But also the unknown option is added, because in OT a lot of information is just not available. So what we can do with this option is saying, okay, we're quite certain that this this tactic has been used, but we don't know how it has been used. And this difference is important to reason about the cyber attacks, which I will show you in a second. And lastly, if the malware is used, the malware used in an attack was known, then this information is also used in the cyber attack. So if we, for example, know that a certain worm is used, and we know how this worm behaves, we can also use this mapping, even though if it's not necessarily provided in the information sources, because it's still factual information. This worm was used. This is how this worm works, and it was used in this cyber attack. So this the attack vector of the cyber attack uses this worm and its tactics and its techniques. So as an example of when operational activities are attacked or when not. So these are two examples of two car manufacturers, Toyota and Honda. So what you can read here is the Toyota auto body confirmed that financial and customer data from auto parts manufacturing Mississippi was stolen, but production suffered no disruption. So this is a real example of the car manufacturer and operational technology user not having a real impact on operational technology. On the other hand, in Honda's case, it says that the operations has been suspended, and the attack was actually designed to attack the industrial control system networks of Honda. And as you can see, it points to disruption of the manufacturer system. So this was really an attack on operational technology. So the next example about factual information. So what you can see here is the initial capability used to infiltrate the facility's corporate network was a phishing email. So you know something about it was phishing, not necessarily a phishing attachment. So what they speculate here is that it could probably be an attachment to this email. But yeah, this is speculation. Just like this next part, no information was known. No information has been presented on how the adversary moved into the production network. So no information was known about the lateral movement of the attacker. So when mapping this attack, you will map unknown to the lateral movement tactic, even though you know it has happened, you do not know how it has happened. So with this methodology, there are some problems. Only little useful information is published or even know about cyber attacks. So for the asterisks of the 133 cyber attacks, only 50% I was able to really find usable information that was mappable to attack for ICS. So this is something that has been a problem over the years. So all between 1988 and 2020, that there is just not that much information available to do a complete mapping of a cyber attack to the attack for ICS framework. Furthermore, as the first attack, so it's between asterisks here because this attack was a disgruntled employee changing the passwords on a PLC so other employees were locked out, was in 1988. So information about all cyber attacks were hard to find. Many news sources that presented the cyber attacks, like linked to other news sources, hopefully with more details, but those news sources were either completely offline or the website has been renewed and the old data was just not on this website anymore. And even though some of these problems were fixable with archive.org, a lot just weren't. So the research of such a cyber attack came to a dead end by this. And another problem is that attacks sometimes only were reported months after they happened. So if you find a news article in June 2002 about the cyber attack in December 2001, it's hard to find other news sources because you have to search within quite a big period. And when searching such a big period, it's hard to find real information, real news sources about the cyber attack and not on other things related to the keywords that we looked for. So as a visualization of only 50% of the cyber attacks that had useful sources. These are all the cyber attacks present in OTCAD at the moment, but only the ones that are not strike through are were able to be mapped to at least one of the techniques of attack for ICS. So some statistics. These statistics, important to note, are about the attacks that could be mapped to at least one technique. So you can see here in initial access, so engineering workstation compromise is on top, but in most other ones, like an execution unknown is on top, but for the other ones not applicable is usually on top, because as you can see, not every cyber attack needs the complete attack vector of attack for ICS tactics. Most of these not applicables are explainable. Well, you can reason about them. You can find these reasonings in the white paper, but to go over them here will take too much time. And next up, the attacker classification sectors. This is again about the ones with the cyber attacks that could be mapped to at least one technique. As you can see, mostly targeted attacks, and most attacks were in power and utilities or transportation. So within OTCAD, there are some trends present. As you can see here, this is the graph of cumulative attacker classifications per year. So the targeted attacks started really surpassing untargeted attacks and disgruntled employees around 2010, 2012. As you can see here, there's a lot of untargeted attacks, and this was mostly worms that spread over the internet and also infected OT networks. So this is really a trend you could see here within 2002 and 2008. But then targeted attacks became really the most common thing within OT cybersecurity. Here, the next graph you can see is the percentage that each technique has been used cumulative over the years. So as you could see here, the engineering workstation compromise is the most used. But you can also see here the orange part is about spear phishing attachments. And even though the first spear phishing attachment was only used in 2011, it grew so big that it's the second most used initial access technique by 2020. This is again something around 2010, 2012. And the next trend is about the collection by adversaries. What you can see here before, again, 2010, 2012, collection was not really that much done by adversaries. And if it was done, it was using automated collection. And then around 2010, 2012, other techniques were being spotted in the wild that were being used by adversaries. And by 2014, every technique within the collection tactic of attack for ICS has been used at least once. So from this, there are a couple of conclusions. First is that detailed public available information about cyber attacks on OT are scarce. So what I said, only 50% we were able to find useful information on that could be mapped with certainty with the vision and methodology of OTCAD to attack for ICS. And in 2010, 2012 was an important turning point for OT security. As you could see, spear phishing attachments started being used. Adversaries became more active in data collection, and the amount of targeted attacks surpassed untargeted attacks. So what you could really see is with the growth of the data collection and the targeted attacks becoming the most common thing, the most common adversary classification, you can really see that it shifted from untargeted, a little bit unintended attacks due to worms to really active adversaries, APTs trying to hack OT and succeeding. And the last conclusion is, I think we all know, is that most initial access is through spear phishing and spear phishing attachments these days. And this was already the presentation of OTCAD. Are there any questions?
Yeah, some questions already coming in, so feel free to submit more. I think the first question is already partly answered. And the question is, there are relatively few attacks that could really be mapped. What are the challenges in here? I think you already explained a few of these challenges.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, more data is either not being published, so not being publicly published, or not even available. So logging in OT networks is bad. It's old. If it even exists, then it's most of the time just bad. And this means that you cannot really see which tactics are used by adversaries because the data is just not there to figure out which techniques are used. So the challenges are really more has to be publicly reported. So more detailed news articles or more detailed reports has to be publicly published, and logging has to be improved. So this data will actually be available and not just unavailable. So nobody actually knows how the cyber attack happened, except for, of course, the adversaries themselves.
Right. Another question around here is, how do you plan to keep the database up to date, and how will you manage the quality?
It's of course it's collaborative, so everybody can add their can pull the GitHub project and then create a pull request, and we will confirm by also checking the information sources. Are they publicly available? Do they actually say that that the mapping that you have also put in the request is correct? This is how we try to keep the quality high, and by keeping it up to date, is we will spend some of our time to once in a while just get a couple of new cyber attacks and doing this research, this mapping, and updating it to OTCAD.
Right. There are also a few questions coming in on the amount of data available and how we could enrich it. And the first question is, are there plans to contact the organizations that were hit to enrich your data so that you have first-hand information and maybe more information than is publicly available?
That could be an option, but I would say that as long as these organizations are then unwilling to publish this information, then we are not going to add it into OTCAD, because what I said, some of these mappings are of a subjective nature, and our vision is that we really want to see that, really want to show that if someone disagrees with it, but does want to use the other information in OTCAD, that he or she can change it themselves and get the statistics that they want from it then. And when something is behind, when something is not publicly available, this person can impossibly see that he or she does not agree with the current mapping. So contacting the organizations themselves is definitely an option, but they must be willing to publicly publish the information that we request from them. Otherwise, we will not add it to OTCAD.
Exactly. And I think that's also linked to another question in this area. Do you cooperate with the National Cybersecurity Center or other governmental organizations that have access to more restricted information than publicly available?
Yeah, I think I've answered this question already. So as long as it's not going to be publicly published, it's not within the vision of OTCAD.
Right. Let me see the next one. You now focused on incidents from the past. Can you project something about the near future based on this information?
Yes, as we could see, the spear phishing attachments really grew a lot in the past years, and I think this is something that will keep on growing. And furthermore, I think this is tied to the human factor, and I think that humans will become more of a problem within OT security because the OT assets are being updated to more recent, taking security into account as well. And just the same as you see in IT, like a lot of cyber attacks include some sort of social engineering. And I think this will become a thing more and more in OT as well, as OT assets are being upgraded, updated, are being more secure by design, etc.
Right. More question about the methodology. Why did you use? Why didn't you use actually the latest version of the MITRE attack framework? And is it easy to upgrade?
We did. While creating this database, the update MITRE V8 got updated to V9, and we actively discussed if we were going to update to V9. This discussion you can find in the white paper as well, but in short, our opinion was that V9 does represented that the historical landscape less complete than V8, and we also decided on not combining the pluses of V9 and the pluses of V8 and leaving out the negatives, because then you really, then it's just again a mix of different frameworks and not really set one framework. Is it easy to upgrade? It's not easy to upgrade, but it's more time consuming, because you can see, what you can do in the attack for ICS framework is look up the old techniques and see where they are, for example, combined to. So you're able to see, like, okay, if I want to go from V8 to V9, this technique does not exist anymore in V9. You can see, okay, what is it? What is this technique mapped now to in V9? And that's a mapping you can make then yourself. But there are also some techniques that are just deprecated and not remapped to a different technique, and that is really where you lose some, in my opinion, valuable information.
Right, understood. Yes. I see that somebody also replies already to the initial question, and that question was around, hey, whether public government organizations like NCSC or intelligence agencies could contribute. And the question now is, I'm not so happy with the answer. Only public sources. Really great work done, but should be discussed with NCSC to have such a great initiative as part of their proposition. I understand that, but I think the answer is still valid. Whatever we will put in OTCAD or OTCAD, it will become public, and certain information is public, and I think they can contribute also to get this database up to date, etc. But yeah, the idea is that it's public, so only public information can be included. Nevertheless, maybe the National Cybersecurity Centers have more information available that is publicly, but that we didn't find yet. And in that case, we definitely want to discuss whether their analysts can contribute to this. And there is, of course, already the option to submit these kind of things via GitHub. But if you want to have another channel to cooperate together, that's absolutely possible. So good suggestion. I think we'll take it to them, whether they have new insights and whether we can can use them as well, and then our resources combined to keep this up to date, because I think it's valuable.
And you're of course free to build on your own proprietary version of OTCAD if you really want this non-public information in this database. But yeah, we as the creators of OTCAD will not put this new information back into OTCAD, because it's also me as a PhD student really wants information to be publicly available and verifiable, because I've seen a lot of claims being made in some of the research that I did, and while researching these cyber attacks, and they're like very vague, and they're based on an opinion, but that opinion might be wrong, and even though it sounds like it's right, you're never sure. And I think that's how you get incorrect representations of data.
Right. Another question: can we use OTCAD for developing intrusion detection solutions for ICS?
I would say yes, but then you are mostly using ATT&CK for ICS and not necessarily OTCAD.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on it?
Because the intrusion detections in IDS will detect one of the techniques, and yeah, it's then you're detecting the ATT&CK for ICS technique. What maybe a possibility is that if you want to create an IDS from scratch and you do not have the capabilities to focus on every ATT&CK for ICS technique, you can use OTCAD to start building from the most observed techniques and start creating an IDS that detects those techniques.
Exactly. So it helps you in prioritizing the most urgent MITRE attack TTPs first.
Yes, exactly.
Right. And for now, the last question, but maybe some others come in the meantime. Oh, I see another one there as well. But so the future of better OT security lies in the sharing of the attacks, etc. So I'm not sure if I fully understand that question. So if you want to elaborate more on it, let us know in the chat window. But maybe you can already give it a try, yes, Dash?
I would say that sharing of information is always a big part in improving anything. So I would say yes, it's not necessarily the only future, but I think it can play a very big role, even though some OT environments are very heterogeneous. So I think that any information that can be shared is worth sharing.
Yeah, and I agree on that. And on top of that, you also see that this is done in many industries. So you learn from your incidents. And I think the biggest example of that is the aviation industry. Whatever incident happens or near incident is always registered, fully analyzed, lessons learned taken from it. And also in industrial environments, you see that this is quite a common methodology for safety. So whatever is happening, even a near miss, you always analyze it, take lessons learned from it, and we can also do the same thing on cybersecurity, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a question whether we can view this content in the ATT&CK navigator.
Yes, you actually can. Not every single attack. So every single attack in the database can be viewed in the ATT&CK navigator. So the GitHub page has a folder, I think, called cyber attacks, and just the GUIDs in a JSON as a JSON file, and that JSON file is from the ATT&CK navigator. So if you load that JSON file into the ATT&CK navigator, you will get the marked techniques of that attack. However, the complete statistics are not loadable into the ATT&CK navigator, but that might be an interesting addition to OTCAD as well. There are some other Python scripts that allow you to filter on the techniques and get the statistics into Excel documents. And the explanation of that you can find on the GitHub page. And if there are any questions, definitely feel free to email me or make an issue in GitHub.
Yeah, that was one comment on it, that it would be nice to have the whole collection to be viewed in Navigator instead of a single technique. So fair comment, I think.
Yes, that's definitely something we can work on.
Interesting question about the geography, actually. What is the geographical distribution of those cyber attacks? And can we see some differences between, for example, the US and Europe?
That's sadly something that is not being mapped in OTCAD. So this is really an improvement point as well. But I must say that for the older cyber attacks that we were able to find, usually a country was not given, or even a continent. So it could be a nice addition, but I'm scared that a lot of countries will get an unknown marking because this information is just not given.
Okay, yeah, and you have a lot of multinational organizations, so you also don't know exactly which countries it applies to in these kind of things.
Yeah. Yes, yeah, and in most cases, if in a multinational, they apply to all countries.
I see two more questions that are, I think, already answered. One is about the MITRE attack for ICS, the next version, V9, V8 discussion. I think we answered them already at the beginning of this Q&A. If you have more questions around it, let us know via email. And the other one is, do you see trends about the attacks and like where they come from, where they go to? I think you already answered that one as well, but maybe you can shortly summarize, as this is probably the last question, unless something else comes in.
I would like some elaboration on where they come from and where they go to. Like, do you mean country-wise? So
no, the attacks. So I think you already explained a little bit. Hey, we now see that spear phishing is really upcoming, and we also expect to continue that in the upcoming time. And you see that technology is improving on the operational technology side. So we expect that the human factor will be more important. These kind of things.
Yes, yeah, and it's really there are two very interesting trends. I think you also see in IT, it all started with worms, not necessarily malicious worms, but worms that are just replicating themselves over the internet, which infect OT networks, which then cause machines to crash because the worm keeps on replicating. That's something you saw in the early 2000s, and now you see ransomware becoming a thing in OT as well, with ATT&CK, for example, on Honda, also the pipeline recent ransomware attack, and GBS, the meat manufacturer. Ransomware is becoming a thing more and more, and it's infecting the OT networks as well. Which causes OT operations to halt.
Exactly. On that note, I would say thank you very much, Tash, for presenting this review. I really want to ask people, if you know more, if you have other examples, feel free to contribute. It's really helpful. With that in mind, I also think about the NCC, etc. So we'll come back to that. And thank you all for joining. There will be a short questionnaire at the end of this session. So maybe you have the next slide there. There will be a small questionnaire. Please fill it out to us. It's really helpful for us to see what type of topics and content we should share next. Thank you all for joining, and I hope to see you soon in another webinar.
Thank you.